From the pedestrian who narrowly avoids an out-of-control truck heading straight for him, to the Liverpool cab driver who miraculously survives an explosion. Here are several moments when people are incredibly lucky. In a small baseball game between amateurs, an unbelievable thing happens. A right-handed man is seen holding his wooden bat and is about to hit the thrown ball. The batter hits his shot, and suddenly we see him leave his place, and while advancing, he launches his bat in the air. A few moments later, the bat falls back on its rounded end and remains in this impossible vertical position, as if it had anchored itself to the ground. However, it must be admitted that this is most certainly a trick using special effects. There is little doubt about it, because the batman's feat is quite impossible, and besides, all his behavior seems fake. If this man wants to impress the world, he will have to rely on his sports performance. The young man you are about to see has invented a new way of fishing. To try it, there is no need for nets, traps, or hooks. All you need is a rake. Eager to film his feat, he asked his friend to film him. The latter accepted, seeing an opportunity to ridicule his companion, who thought he was very clever with his rake. The important moment arrives. The fisherman is standing on a beach, ready to dive into the pond. For his technique is to dive in and pierce the fish with his rake. The young man waits for the right moment, then jumps in and stays underwater for a few seconds. Surprising as it may seem, the method worked. The young man is happy to hold up his rake, with two big fish wriggling at the end. His friend could not believe his eyes and exclaimed with joy and surprise. This method, as you can imagine, has one major flaw, which is that it only works one time in 1,000. The young man may dive down with his makeshift rake, but he's sure to come up empty-handed. At least he will have filmed his successful attempt, otherwise nobody would believe him. While wood stacking games are a headache for most people, this man sets himself an even tougher challenge. He has to remove a shoulder-high piece without affecting the balance of the entire scaffold, and he proposes to do it with a blow from the side of his hand, or as they say in martial arts, the edge of his hand. The challenge is very tough, and you have to be extremely skilled. The man gets into position and prepares to execute his blow. His movement is clean and precise, the piece of wood is ejected, and the blow is a complete success. The spectators around him applaud, and the protagonist is all smiles. Here we must admit that there is more talent than luck. The man obviously trained himself, and by performing his trick in a crowded restaurant, he showed a lot of courage. If he had missed, he would have looked ridiculous and made a mess of things. Speaking of lucky people, it's hard not to mention David Perry, who you've probably heard about in the last few weeks. David Perry is a cab driver in Liverpool, and since November 14, he's been considered a national hero. On a Sunday morning, David Perry stopped his cab in Rutland Avenue to pick up a man named Imad Al-Swamin, who wanted to go to a maternity hospital not far from a cathedral where a commemoration of war victims was being held and attended by many people. During the journey, the driver, David Perry, becomes suspicious of his passenger, who is behaving strangely and making suspicious movements. But the driver soon guesses the criminal intentions of the passenger, who was actually wearing an explosive belt. Moreover, the suspect seemed to manipulate his device at every moment, as if trying to fix it. With remarkable lucidity, David Perry perceived the threat and quickly devised a plan to get out of his predicament. The driver arrives at his destination, and at the same time, several spectacular events are filmed in quick succession. We see the vehicle slow down and then explode, and a few seconds later, David Perry manages to escape in a cloud of smoke. Meanwhile, the flames multiply and consume the vehicle. David Perry, without really knowing it, may have saved the city from a horrific attack, assuming that the suspect's plan was to commit his crime in the middle of the ceremony, where over 1,000 people were present. David Perry is a national hero, but more importantly, he is a miracle worker. Indeed, the explosion took place while he was still in the vehicle. But if he managed to survive and prevent a great misfortune, he was still injured. Today, as he tells it himself, he is focused on healing both mentally and physically, while closely following the police investigation around these events. In this regard, the information gathered by the investigation is not sufficient to shed light on this strange drama. It was revealed, for example, that Imad Al-Swamin, of Iraqi origin, had converted to the Christian faith and that he suffered from mental disorders. It is hoped that he will make a speedy recovery and receive the honors for his courage. This is the kind of coincidence that is great to see and almost impossible to repeat. This is a contestant on the British version of the game show Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? To be invited to participate in this game, you have to be a little lucky. The day before the shooting, the few people selected are gathered in a hotel rented by the production. They are given a test. They have to answer a question quickly, and the one who succeeds best participates in the program. It is thus the case of the candidate of which we are going to speak. The game goes well, and she does well. Her potential winnings increase, and she moves up the pyramid ladder. She has only one question left. If she gets the answer right, she is sure to win about the equivalent of 76,000 euros. The question was, in 2013, Penguin merged with another company to form the world's largest publishing house. The candidate was very happy and couldn't stop laughing. She knows the answer best because she worked at the historic Random House when it joined with Penguin Books to form a joint venture called Penguin Random House. Therefore, the candidate can not only formulate the correct answer, but she can also talk at length about the subject she experienced. After that, the game was over, and that was unfortunate because she was on a roll and she could have won more. How likely was it that a general knowledge question would be specifically about the contestant's former job? While there are amazing anecdotes on this game, this former editor's win is right up there with the rest. Dustin, an American construction worker, went through an awful experience a few months ago that is a phobia for many people. In the state of Indiana, Dustin and his colleagues, among whom was his brother, had to install a drain pipe in a hole several meters deep. The task was made even more difficult by the fact that the ground had become slippery and crumbly due to the rainfall of the previous days. But this circumstance did not deter the workers, who first had to drain all the water in the excavation. Dustin and the other workers set about this task, and they were about to complete it. But then a horrible catastrophe occurred. Dustin had placed his ladder on a muddy area, and as he tried to climb it, it suddenly sank. Everything collapsed around him, and to his horror, he found himself neck-deep in mud. The pressure on his body was such that he could hardly breathe. His brother immediately called for help, and while waiting for them to arrive, several workers tried to extricate the unfortunate worker. Unfortunately, they were not doing him any favors. They risked getting him even deeper into the water and putting themselves at risk. The footage shows the rescue of Indiana firefighters. It took nearly 4 hours to completely excavate Dustin, who, as you can imagine, was in shock. But luckily, he did not suffer any serious injuries. Dustin was really lucky. The collapsing ground spared his head, and he was able to survive being stuck in the mud up to his chin for 4 long hours without injury. Roman Rohrmoser is from Austria and is 36 years old. Since his youth, he liked to practice sports such as skiing, cycling, mountaineering, and paragliding. It was while practicing this last hobby that he had a terrible experience, but the outcome was ultimately happy. That day, he decided to train for paragliding in Austria, but his adventure turned out badly. A failure of his paraglider prevented him from orienting himself. In the images of a camera he had taken, we see him trying in vain to regain control of the aircraft by maneuvering energetically the lines. Nothing works. Luckily, he was able to avoid a violent and fatal fall as he was flying over Lake Aachen. The pictures even show the moment when he plunged into the water. According to Roman Rohrmoser, these images do not quite reflect the reality of the athlete's experience. You can't see it, but according to him, his heart rate was 200 beats per minute. But this experience, as he said himself, will serve as a lesson in the future, and besides, he prefers to see only the funny and the original side. These images are from a camera on board a car. Everything happens in a few seconds. The main car stops at a light in front of an intersection. Almost at the same time, in the opposite direction, an uncontrollable truck comes at full speed and barely avoids a stopped car. But this dodge disorients the truck, which overflows on the transverse lane, comes to strike a black vehicle. In the middle of all this, a poor passerby found himself in a high-risk zone. He was about to cross the crosswalk when the dump truck ran into him. Then, in a split second, the passerby had the miraculous reflex to accelerate his step, thus avoiding in extremis the out-of-control truck. Obviously, the jolt must have shaken the young man. In his dodging movement, he ended up throwing himself to the ground, and from the way he got up, you'd think he'd hurt himself a bit. Nevertheless, he is prodigiously lucky. The speeding truck must have continued to cause damage in an unstoppable breakthrough. Here is a very short sequence where we see a young woman taking a lot of risks without realizing it. This young woman is standing on the end of a small platform in a promontory on a lake. She is wearing a bathing suit and is about to do a backwards somersault. This young woman is probably more used to landing on the ground and has not trained enough to dive. Indeed, there is a small detail that she did not pay attention to and that could have caused a serious misfortune. The diver will succeed in her jump, but if she looks at the images in slow motion, she will realize that she was very lucky. During the rotation, Her head almost hit the platform from which she jumped. Usually, the fear of those who practice the back somersault is to make a bad fall. In this case, it is the rotation itself that is dangerous, yet her movements are correct, but her carelessness was to ignore the edge of the platform, which she narrowly avoided. This is the end of our video, which we hope will have amused you. As usual, feel free to share your impressions in the comments section, and if any of these cases surprised you, tell us why. Did you like this video? Then don't forget to put a like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell so you won't miss any of our next publications. See you tomorrow, same time, same channel.